Welcome to Behind the Bearcat. This is the podcast where the Northwest Missouri State University Career Services Office chats with Northwest faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends to hear about their career journeys, how they got to where they are, and how they became Bearcats. I'm Career Services Assistant Director Travis Klein.
And I'm Hannah Christian, the Director of Career Services here at Northwest. And a big drum roll. Today's guest on our show is...
Well, and I'm Dr. Stephanie Krauth. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs in charge of Title IX and Equity.
Welcome.
Woo! Welcome. We're very glad to have you on here. So, I don't know if you've listened to the podcast before, but sometimes I like to go way back to baby Dr. Stephanie. So that is a very specific title that you have. I would like to know how you went from, a high school student hanging out, like how do you get from that place to this place? I'm sure that is a long and interesting journey. So I'm ready to go. Let's just hear that story.
Oh my gosh. Well, it is a journey. I was going to say it was a journey. It was a journey, but it's still a journey. So I grew up in a small town in Iowa called Messina, Iowa. It's about an hour and 15 minutes north of Maryville. So definitely farm community. Um, it- you know, I think the way I've kind of got interested in this field and how it's kind of progressed. Um, ha- have you ever read the book Mitch Albom's Five People You Meet in Heaven?
Yes.
Where you have those individuals in your life that have impacted you, even if you didn't realize it at the time, but you go back and you're like, wow, if I hadn't engaged with them, my life might look really different. And so, having those influences in your life, my mom was a teacher at a time when you didn't go back to school and get your teaching certificate when you were married and had kids, so there was that kind of role modeling. I've had great teachers throughout my life who saw something, so they give me a book and I devour it because I was just so excited, not only for the book but for the teacher's interest. And my passion, my field of interest has always actually been history. So for all you liberal arts majors out there, go liberal arts. Um, and I went to college at Simpson College for my bachelor's, and my major was history and interdisciplinary social studies. And I remember at the time I'd always get well, what are you going to do with that? You always get that question, right? And my answer, which probably exuded a little more self-confidence than I really had, was, anything I want.
That's a great answer,
I
by the
think
way.
it was a little bravado there, but I used my field of interest and my degree in my career and during my life? Absolutely. Because it's not just about the content of the major. I do believe follow your passion. Like if you're really interested in the field, absolutely, because you go to class and you experience your education in a very different way when you love what you're learning. But you're not just learning. I'm not just learning when Norman the Conqueror came over and conquered England. I'm not worried about what date that
1066.
is exactly. Um, but the skills that you have to acquire in order to master the content has really seen me through. The writing, the in history, it's about a narrative, it's about a story, it's a lot about context. So even when I headed into student affairs, and I know, Hannah, I think I've told you the funny story of how I just landed in student affairs. um, but I've used that all the time. I write all the time, whether I'm helping a student through a difficult situation or I'm investigating a student conduct case throughout my career, or whatever service area of student affairs I've worked in, and I've worked in quite a few. it really is about context. The What's the students experiencing, maybe what the faculty is experiencing, maybe what the staff's experiencing. How does that puzzle piece fit into the larger puzzle of the institution? So I think when you hear a little bit more about my career journey, part of that has been that ebb and flow between, do you want to be a generalist,
Mm.
or do you want to be a specialist? And why is it also good to have be a bit of both and have your feet in both, um, kiddie pools at the same time?
So I
So
got a quick question for you.
yeah,
Did you ever have a thought of teaching history or social studies, or you just did that because you truly love the content area? Like you didn't maybe consider teaching at all?
well, um, at the time, and I still think students in that field get the push a little bit more. The assumption is that you will teach. So, did I get my teacher certification in the state of Iowa? Yeah, I did. Did I student teach? Yeah, I did. Um, did I love it? Yeah. Did I decide this is what I want to do with the rest of my life? That would be a no. And it just wasn't a good fit. But
That's an
the
important I think that's something
Hmm.
that's very important, especially for young people to hear, because they think I've invested all of my time and all of my energy toward pointing me toward this very specific career path of teaching, and I feel like I'm wasting that experience if I don't follow through with it. So I think that's such an important thing for
Mhm.
young people to hear.
Hmm.
Absolutely. But, did I glean a lot from those education courses? Yes. Who doesn't, especially in a college environment, who doesn't use a little bit of human development theory in their work? Or, um, a lot of my career in student affairs, I picture it as a classroom. It's outside the
Mm.
classroom, but it's classroom. So there's learning outcomes. There's um, you know goals. There's kind of an intent or a purpose to what you do. And a lot of that I learned just through my education courses is how to think about structuring an experience, and that's so much of what you learn. So yeah, I did go through that path and was just kind of like, but even when I was graduating as a senior, and this gets into the story how I fell into student affairs, I was also active in Greek life as an undergraduate. Um, but I had literally gone to the Career Center. Yay, Career Center! Everybody should use them. And I had a teacher's resume, and I had a general skills resume at the time. Um, and I was going in to get them evaluated, and they printed them out on computer. Yes, there were computers way back when I was in college. My son doesn't believe me, but it's true. Um, and I picked up my resume out of this printer, and I happened to catch the document underneath it, and it was a job description for a hall director and Panhellenic Council advisor over at Truman State University. Um, and that's the job I applied for, and that's the job I got. So talk about fate, and maybe the five people you meet in heaven. Um, and that's how I got into student affairs. But um, there's so much. I mean, when you get started in that first role, you just got to be a sponge. You take it all in. You learn. You recognize that you are coming in fresh, and you're not going to know it all. And you just again just got to be ready and just embrace it and enjoy that kind of newfound skill set that you're developing as you move forward. But it's also time to kind of take stock and realize, what do you love and what do you not love, and do you want to continue in this field? Do you want to do something slightly different? And but I really found my home. There was so much in kind of working with college students and being part of the higher ed environment that just spoke to me. And again, I think that kind of goes back to, I had some great mentors at Simpson. Um, I had some great student life experiences at Simpson. And so being able to kind of step into now an entry level role and seeing that flip side, but realizing the impact you can make in that first job, that was the light bulb, and that was the spark. And um, I think one thing I always tell students, even whether they're entry level or not, or employees, is, really become a student of your field. You know, read, um, get involved in organizations, even if you can't always go to a conference. Read the blogs. I mean, there's just really embrace, um, and develop kind of a depth and a specialty in your field. And I can kind of talk generalization in a little bit, but yeah, that was it. So, a couple years there. At the time, you got hired at Truman State as a hall director with a bachelor's, and that's you don't find that at every institution. A lot of areas now are looking for a master's, but you could get your master's. So, my master's is actually in history as well. And the
Oh.
reason for that is the dean of students at the time at Truman was developing a concept called residential colleges, where there were live-in faculty in the residence
Hmm.
halls, and actually classes being taught in the residence halls. I mean, really that blending, which was a great exposure, uh, new in my career. And but he wanted his hall directors to have a graduate degree in what he called a discipline. So that's why I wound up with history as compared maybe to some other things. And so I just kind of started to follow that route. Um, in student affairs, it's usually, especially Res Life, it's your hall director. You might be a hall director at a bigger institution, kind of different situation, and you kind of move up the chain. Um, and you can do that at one place, or you can kind of move around. I wound up moving around. And so when I say kind of the second theme of my journey, other than generalist and specialist, is also about family. Um, Happened about that time my husband and I got married. Um, there was nothing in Kirksville for him. So it was like, okay, I've got to move and take a hall director job at another institution. And in this case, it was a university called Grandview University, and it was a men's hall director, an all men's building, um, which was a lot of fun. And so again, you get this kind of different experience, and even for new professionals, you go into that second job. Okay, again, embrace it, be a sponge, learn a different way of doing things, try something new, um, just really be that student of the profession. And
So
so,
I got a quick
yeah,
question for you, Stephanie.
yeah.
Um, as a hall director, I'm always kind of interested in this. You lived in the hall, right?
Mhm.
So my question for you was how did you know like when it was time to move into the next position? But maybe that's tied in with as a married individual, did that change moving from like I'm a single person living in a res hall? That's pretty easy to imagine if you've been a traditional student and lived in a residential sort of thing. Like getting married and also living in a res hall is a little bit different experience. Can you talk to me about that?
Absolutely. So, and that was the catalyst. So I did spend 2 years at Grandview University, and it was my husband who's like, okay, this 2 a.m. getting knocks on the door kind of thing, sleep is an option kind of lifestyle is not working for me. And I got it. He'd been an undergraduate at Iowa State and lived on campus for several years. And so, you want to move beyond that. Um, so, but I think um, that that particular part of my career. So yeah, here's this family influence saying, okay, yeah, no, we kind of switched gears, and um, I wasn't quite sure what to switch to. I mean, it was more of, okay, we got to stay in an area, and couples have to deal with this all the time, where you still want to stay in a particular geographic area because the other spouse might have a job in that area. And what do you do? Um, so what I wound up doing, because that was about a year of being a little, do I want to stay in higher ed? And how do I do this? And how do I do this and stay in the geographical area? I wound up getting a grad assistantship and taking a few classes at Iowa State. And it was in orientation.
Ah,
So here was my opportunity to because my master's was in history, get a couple classes in just higher ed, but as I was kind of feeling my way, but here was this opportunity to work in a whole different area of the institution. Again, that was my passion. Is I love to see how these things worked, and I loved higher ed, and so that was a wonderful experience. But after about a year of that, um, I I wound up um, getting an interview. I was just kind of randomly searching and at one of those career fairs that student affairs often has, especially with housing, and wound up having an interview with Mississippi University for Women. Now we're talking, okay, this is a leap of faith, but it was that couple decision of, well, you never know till you go. We have been Midwesterners our whole life. We've never lived in another area of the United States. I was going to be a director of residence life. He kind of maxed out where he was in terms of his employment, as far as moving up and those opportunities. It really was a leap of faith. So we wound up going to Columbus, Mississippi, and I was a director of residence life down there. Again, very different institution. Um, Mississippi, deep South, very diverse. Um,
All women's institution, right?
well, it
No?
was co-ed, but
Ah,
it was forced to be co-ed
ah.
through a little court case called the Ayers case, but it had not been co-ed for long. So yeah, an interesting dynamic with that. Um, Mississippi State, 20 minutes away. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, just you talk about very different environment, very different influences on the campus culture. And I think that was my opportunity to get a sense of different campus cultures, right? Um, and so even a new student going out in the workforce and maybe they're on job 2 or 3 is, really um, get a sense of the culture of where you're working and realize that the culture of one place is not always the same as the culture of another place. So being open to what that work environment or that organizational culture values and how they operate and um,
I'm gonna
the
jump in here real quick.
yeah.
You mentioned job 1, job 2, job 3. I really that is a very insightful thing because I don't think until you've worked for a significant amount of time at a place, you don't understand how impactful the culture is
Mhm.
to your life in general, right? So, students, we always talk about like you need to investigate the company, investigate the culture. And you can know that in your head, but you don't
Absolutely.
know if you're a good fit or you don't know how that's going to impact your life until you try out a few different jobs and kind of get a feel for how that culture really impacts you as an employee. So that's a really insightful sort of thing that people think they're like, I know what kind of culture I like. Well, you likely don't know because you haven't worked in a, more than
Right.
one culture,
Well, and you can go through an interview process and you may not get a complete sense. Actually, you don't get a complete sense of the culture.
right?
You're for multiple reasons and really some of it might be intentional, but a lot of it is not. It's just you're going to interview with certain people and they're going to represent what they think the culture is or they are representative of that culture, but they're really not the full kit and caboodle. So yeah, you have to kind of see in that interview, do I feel like a good fit? But you also have to be pretty open when you move into that next environment of, okay, I've got to get used to the nuances. Um,
Mhm.
what's the I'd hate to use the word politics, but what's the kind of underlying politics of the organization? Those types of things, and you're not going to get that in an interview. Um, you just gotta glean and figure that out and be open and but also kind of careful at the same time. Um, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was actually in a UMR Kuho, that's housing, kind of Midwest housing listserv, and it was a new director of residence life, and I just kind of become a new director of residence life, but I was still on that listserv, even though I was in the deep South. And the the director who was replying to all this and giving her input was saying, you spend the first year learning. You don't have to make any changes unless they're absolutely necessary, like legally necessary, risk management necessary, but just learn, meet people, learn. Then year two, figure out your vision and start to put it in place. And then let 3, 4, and 5 be the ones where you kind of solidify that vision as a director, as a leader. And then be ready to reinvent yourself again. And I've heard that theme multiple times in my career, even during my PhD program, is, every 7 years you need to reinvent yourself for multiple reasons. So that, I guess that's the other piece of good advice
It's
I've
good to
gotten.
know. I'm taking
Yeah.
notes here.
All right. Are
Reinvent
you
yourself
really?
every 7 years. Here we
Yeah.
go.
No, I don't know that there's a definite timeline, but it does feel that way in some businesses, and higher ed's one of them, because you have the 4 to 6 year cycle of incoming students, and when they graduate, that you be ready to kind of shift gears a little bit, or go back and look at what you're doing every 5 years to make sure you're still meeting the needs of students, because the student population is changing, and not just the student population, the world's changing. Um,
And your staff changes.
and
If
your
you can
staff
keep a staff
changes.
member for
Oh,
3 to 5 years, please share that secret, because we
absolutely,
would pay to have it. So,
absolutely. So, I was at Mississippi University for Women for 5 years, and by then we'd had our son Sam. So it was kind of this move was prefaced on family again. It became an issue of we what we valued was making sure our son knew his grandparents and the family members. So it became a hunt to try and find something in the Midwest. Um, and so we did do a little bit of a stop in Jacksonville, Illinois at Illinois College. Again, I was a director of residence life, so different culture. Um, but really, our aim was still, how can we get just a little bit closer? And I did wind up back at my alma mater at Simpson as an associate dean. So now I kind of progressed to a point where I'd done housing, and that was kind of my bailiwick and my specialty. And I knew all about how to buy furniture, and I knew all about renovations, and I knew all about staffing and RA training and programming models. And suddenly I was in a position where it's like, well, that's one of many things we're going to have you do. So here becomes this kind of generalist notion. But throughout your career, you got to figure out what's going to motivate you and kind of keep that passion alive, or reignite a passion. Maybe if you've kind of hit the wah wah part of a year or a few years. And I hadn't hit the downside. It was just, to me, this, oh, okay, I can move closer to family, but here's this job that kind of offers me some additional opportunities beyond just residence life. Like, I can see a little bit further. And that's the kind of thing that had motivated me when I kind of had that one-off year where I was learning about orientation. So then it became, I supervised security. I did the retention committee. I did all the student conduct, housing, and then pretty much whatever else they threw on my plate. And I thrived in that environment for about 10 and a half years. So um, you do find that niche where, okay, this is a really, really, really good fit. And I'm just basking in the glory and loving life. And that was kind of the time at Simpson. But it was because of all those other opportunities, and at that point in your career, being able to really branch out, maybe generalize, learn a bunch of new stuff. Again, that just is such a, to me, learning is essential, and that's such a motivational piece for me. And I hope for many others as they kind of travel that career path is, yeah, I want to keep learning. Um,
So,
so
at what point
yeah,
in this part of your career, because you threw out a couple things, for that position to be associate dean, did you already have your PhD at that point?
I
No.
didn't.
Where did the PhD come in? Because now you've got a kid and you've moved across the country a few times, and then you're just like, Stephanie is here. Like, how did that all conspire?
Oh my gosh. So I got my PhD while I was at Simpson. Uh, and I had been thinking about it. Um, Iowa State was about an hour away. Drake was close by, so there were a couple programs. Um, and I'd taken a few courses at Iowa State that then would feed into that
Ah,
PhD program. So that was good. But no, it really took a tap on the shoulder. Um,
hmm.
again, the five people, that influence your life that you meet in heaven. So I actually had a peer who was going through that program, who was in trio support services, and he literally tapped me on the shoulder and was like, "Why aren't you doing this? Because your experience and you're doing all of this as Simpson, and you've got, you know, every single toe in a wide variety of areas. Why aren't you going for this PhD?" Um, and that was it. I went home to my husband and I'm like, I I think I want to go for this. And very supportive spouse was like, he didn't say you're crazy. He was just like, okay, well let's check into it. Um, but I was one of those who, you know, took care of the child, was married, kept in higher ed, a full-time job is not just 40 hours a week. I was in a role where, you would
Especially
respond to
in student
jam in the
affairs. Yep.
morning and
Yep.
everything like that. And I'm like, oh yeah, and I'm going to go for a PhD too. So I did burn a candle at both ends for several years, trying to get that done and make sure that nothing suffered. Um, so yeah, I did that. Now, one thing I'd always advise folks is, yeah, okay, if you're going to go for the gusto at certain phases in your career where you're going to try and juggle all that, just don't forget to take care of yourself. Because that's usually the thing that goes all the way down the rung when you're trying to juggle multiple things. But I did do that, and got done, and was very happy. And I will probably not go back into a classroom as a student for a long time. Um,
Fair.
I'm gonna learn other ways, but yeah, and yeah, just emerged with that PhD, which that was a great time in my life to be going back for that PhD. And juggling things was not so fun, but when you can bring, some people will be like, when you go to get your graduate degree, well, when do I do that? Should I do that right out of the bachelor's program? Should I wait a while? And I did do the master's right out of the bachelor's program, but my environment kind of led to that. Um, but the PhD, I think that was a good choice for me because I had accrued enough career experience that when you started to deep dive then into what is going to be a more research based, a very kind of deep, immersive process, you've already got the experience to be able to say, I can see how all this connects. And I don't know that students, if they go straight through a PhD, and I'm talking like a higher ed field, some fields are very different, but I would see those students going straight through in a higher ed graduate program, and they hadn't experienced the the
The work.
work. And it's hard to make that connection between the theory you're learning, the research you're learning, the research tactics you're learning, and the work if you haven't done the work. So yeah, that wound up being kind of a wound up being a perfect situation in the long run. Um, so then what's next? You get done with that PhD and you're like, do I hang out as an associate dean, um, or do I try something else? And again, that was kind of a family thing of, you never know till you go. And we promised our son, like, we might do one more move, but we will not do any more. And it was at a phase in his young life where if he had to move, that was an okay
Just do it
time.
now. Yep.
He still had great friends, and but he could make new ones in a new environment. So I did take a VP for student affairs role at Westminster College, um, for 4 years, and yeah, that was an amazing experience too. I will admit, and I think it's just fair as students are kind of contemplating their career field. Again, it gets back to Hannah, to your conversation about fit. And it was a small private institution. It is a small private institution. It had been all male for
Hmm.
most of its history. Um, and that impacts that culture. And one of the things I did discover, you're stepping into a leadership role where the board of trustees and everybody, they're all male, and they had been part of the institution when it was all male. And it was also an institution where at some point in its history had been 98% fraternity.
Wow.
So your experience as an alum was all male fraternity. And here I am, I'm a middle-aged woman in a VP of student affairs role, trying to articulate needed changes to this very male-dominated culture. So that was a learning experience, absolutely. And sometimes I was successful, and sometimes I wasn't. And um, but that was one of those moments where you figure out, going, okay, I might have been used to Simpsons culture for 10 and a half years. I've got to take my time and learn this culture and how I can be successful in this culture. Um, so yeah, did that. But then I kind of got another leap. Um, I kind of got back into Texas, and the reason for that again is family. All my husband's family's in Texas, so here I wound up at Texas Women's University again. Now I was back as an associate vice president, but still very generalist. A lot of areas. Texas is a whole different culture. Texas Women's University was co-ed as well, but didn't always want to be. So again, it had a lot of connections with that Mississippi University for Women experience. And I would use that experience as I was getting my feet wet at Texas Women's University. And I'm glad I had that experience, because then it wasn't just taking, you know, the Iowa State co-ed experience or the Westminster College experience or whatever and going, oh, this is exactly what Texas Woman's like. It isn't, and it wasn't, but at least I had something that I could glean from and say, I see a lot of similarity here, and this will really help me navigate that, and it did. Because yeah, it was just a very different thing. So yeah, had 7 years there. Again, Texas is amazing in some ways. It's interesting in others. The culture, it was really besides Mississippi, was one of my great opportunities to understand underrepresented populations and diversity and the challenges that come with that. And not only for the female focused nature of it, but of course, it was an Hispanic serving institution. It was a Pacific Islander, by the time I was done during my time there, serving institution. It actually met that threshold. It was on the verge of being a multicultural serving institution. I mean, it was very diverse, other than being primarily female. And just being exposed to those challenges and those struggles, and how can you develop support systems for students wherever they're at in their lives and whatever they're bringing to the table. It's just so important. And again, that was refueling this fire of why student affairs has been so much fun and higher ed's been so much fun. But family intercedes again, and my my only sibling happened to pass away in July 2020, and my mother was in Messina, here's rural Iowa, and it was that call again to, you need to take care of a family member, and that's how I've kind of wound up at Northwest. So again, here's this journey of family, but it's also that journey of, I went specialist. I became much more of a generalist, where I knew a lot about student affairs in a lot of different areas. And the thing that has been so much fun at Northwest, besides being back in this area, is having that opportunity to specialize again. Um, Instead of worrying necessarily about big picture, I'm trying to figure out where this particular office fits in the big picture. So I'm trying to figure out the puzzle piece. And there is a specialization involved with Title IX, Title VI, ADA, and all of that. That, you know, folks in higher education don't always want to get into these areas because it is such specialization. They're like, that's not fun. That's not the fun stuff. Well, No, it may not be the fun stuff, but the impact it can have on students and the impact you can have on the institution if you
Mm.
handle things the right way,
Super
it can
high
be
impact.
super.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm. But it is a specialization for sure, and something that, I've had to either re-engage with the materials because throughout my career, I've been involved in student conduct in some way or another. I actually was doing Title IX before it was Title IX. Um, but having that chance to kind of, yeah, okay, I got a new skill set I need to develop. This is great. Um, has been a lot of fun. So yeah, that's I think the other part of the journey is learning, staying passionate, being both a generalist and a specialist, and at different times in your career, you'll emphasize one over the other. Um, and I think just being ready to roll with whatever comes your way and find that balance. That's an ideal. It's pretty elusive, but that's what I admire about the young generation especially the employees that um, who now report to me and stuff is they do understand that kind of work life balance, or they strive for that. You're not going to see that much in the folks my age. We lived to work,
We're
and
very unbalanced. Yes.
Mhm.
we live to work, and now it's kind of like, okay, I love the idea of, well, sometimes you work to live. Um, so so that's
One
kind
thing
of my thing.
another thing about your story that's so interesting to me is I love how you embrace kind of that seasonality, not just in that I'm learning to learn or I'm learning for the next position, but understanding that sometimes, like this season of my life is now about relocating to take care of my mom, right? And maybe that means that my position is going to have some different aspects of it for me. I think that's hard also for a young person or someone who hasn't maybe experienced some of those seasons of life to kind of understand. When you're a college student, we see this all the time with students who come in when you think career or you talk career, it's just like a big, like one
Mhm.
big thing. It's got to be one big thing. And you don't really view it as kind of a seasonal or a fluctuating entity, really, that kind of organically comes about based on family,
Absolutely.
based on life situation. So that was a really good tale of kind of
Right.
seasonality and leaning into that type of thing.
Well, or you find that young people somehow, feel that there's an expectation that they have it all figured out.
Mhm.
Well, eh, I
Mm.
still don't have it all figured out. So I think it is, um, knowing yourself, um, paying attention to your priorities, figuring out what uh, keeps you engaged and passionate, because then that's how you best serve others.
Right.
I think that's the servant leader part, but you still have to kind of figure out what's going on in here and then go, okay, time for a shift or time for change, or this is what matters to me. And yeah, that is not always planned, and you're talking to somebody who, I'm a planner. I would love to have road mapped out my career when I was an undergraduate, color coded it. You saw my office and all my big post-it notes and stuff. I would have loved to have been like that, and you just need to realize, no, it's not always going to be that way, and that's okay. That's
Mm.
okay. And just to make the most of those situations, and that, by and large, you'll land on your feet. Um, but it also takes the right mindset of continuing to learn, continuing to grow, um, being involved in what you're passionate about, um, all
And
of
taking
those
the
kind of
risk
things.
sometimes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you get some of that in student affairs as well, as that question of, well, do I just hang out at the same institution, or do I hop in order to get those experiences? I think when I was younger, I would have said, I want to stay at the same institution, or I might hop a couple places and then I want to stay put. And I have wound up kind of moving around a little bit more than I thought I was going to, right? Um, but when I look back, if anyone ever says, "Well, would you have done something differently?" And I'm like, "Well, they wouldn't have gotten me here if I had."
Mhm.
So
Hmm.
it's just taking it as it comes.
Can you
So,
talk to us?
okay.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Travis.
Can
Go
you
ahead.
talk to us a little bit about Title IX? I feel like that's one of those
Oh,
things outside of education. Nobody
We
knows what
always
it
talk
is.
about, yeah,
And
Title
even the
IX, and it's
people
like a
inside
code.
education were afraid of it. I know. I mean, I was on staff council at Northwest for a long time, and anytime Title IX came up, it was always like, oh no, I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to touch that. So I think there's kind of a stigma and a fear around it a little bit, but it's really not.
mm-hmm.
The little bit I know, and I'm no expert, but it doesn't seem like it's anything to be afraid of. It's actually a thing that's good for students and good for the institution. So if you could just, I know it's you can't do all of it because it's that would be here for 3 days, but just give us a little brief overview of Title IX and maybe why it's not the big scary boogeyman that some of us who work at colleges and universities may think it is.
Oh, sure. And it's interesting that you kind of bring that up in that fear factor. Because one of the conversations in sometimes the Title IX compliance kind of field when you're talking about professionals in the role is, do you have a lawyer? Do you have
Mhm.
someone who's kind of gone through student affairs and learned, right? I'm always a little bit more on, you gotta be a bit of both. You gotta know your law a little bit in this a little bit, a little bit, um, in this field, but, it's nice to have had that background because then you can figure out, again, how does it fit within the institution, and how do you do the best you can by the students or by the people impacted. So, Title IX, Title VI, ADA are all those laws that are about, giving individuals access, in this case, kind of to educational opportunities, and that it not be they not be deprived of that access because of with ADA a disability, with Title IX because of their gender or sex, with Title VI because they are an underrepresented class. Um, so, you know, a lot of the management of Title IX is, and this is where the history degree and everything kind of plays into it, is being able to work with students, work with individuals involved in particular situations, figuring out support measures, working through a process. And, it can be investigation, it can be an adjudication, it can be a mediation. There's all sorts of options for students, but it's very situational, it's very personal. Um, and even though it's structured, the idea is, again, how do we make sure that you haven't been denied an educational opportunity to get there? So a lot of people automatically associate sexual violence. That's definitely one part of Title IX, and we do all the investigations or process through that. But some of it's even different stuff. It could be um, a student who engages in a classroom and the faculty member refuses to use their preferred name. And after, many, 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 many reminders of how they like to be called, it's still not changing. They might come to see me. So it's, I talked about culture. Some of it is also that kind of addressing situations in a culture in order to make the culture better. And and that can take a very formal process form, but it can also take a lot of mediation, triage, intervention kind of form. And I know, Travis, I'm probably not digging down into the dirt of nine and ADA and six, but um, people do get hung up on it's a law, there are
Mhm.
laws out there, and it's really everything that's happening underneath and the process and the interaction and the engagement is actually a lot richer and a lot more focused on the person and trying to do right by everybody involved. Even if a person is on the kind of accused, alleged, respondent side of it, it's designed to try and make it's very restorative justice is
Mhm.
what the term is typically, where you're trying to make right, you're trying to heal, and intervene or do whatever in order to heal and be able to move forward under a lot of layers of legal language. So yeah, I always encourage students, yeah, put in a report, come and see me because even if it doesn't maybe rise to the surface of a Title IX policy violation or a Title VI, which Title VI is actually a lot harder to prove, that somebody's been denied because they're part of an underprivileged, underrepresented community. But we can still do things through this office that can impact their experience and the campus culture, so that um, the culture can be uh, inclusive, and the experience can still be good. And I think that's a huge part of what I do, is before it ever gets to this level of law and process, that we are doing everything we can, um, just to address things and make the campus and the student experience better.
I think that's a great overview. Yeah,
Awesome.
we're all here to serve students. Those things just make sure that we do it the right way.
Yep,
So I think
yep,
that that's not anything
yep,
to be afraid of. It's just something that we all need to be aware of and make sure we're following, and that students need to know that they have rights as well, and they can go talk
absolutely.
to you and find out what those are.
And a lot of times people don't always realize that what they're doing could be interpreted as
Mhm.
depriving somebody of that educational opportunity or access. So it really is, it's learning. It's even that is a learning experience, and that kind of enlightenment that can come from, did you realize, did you think about this in this
Mhm.
fashion and how this impacts that person. So yeah, that comes with a lot of that.
All right, I got one as we kind of wrap this up. I got one last question for you. That's the tips and tricks and advice question,
Ooh.
because what I find so interesting, right? You have been a successful job seeker, and many different, like, you've stayed in the same field, but you have worked at many different institutions. So obviously you've been successful in seeking positions and, interviewing and being asked to come join their team.
Hmm.
So any insightful bits in terms of what can someone who is maybe a job seeker now, what can they do to increase their odds of, successfully navigating that job search process?
You know, definitely keep an updated resume. And even if it isn't in the resume format, keep an ongoing list of what you're doing and what you've done, trainings, skills you've acquired, that kind of thing. I do try and keep my resume updated because I never know, right? And not about a job hunt, no, but sometimes even other opportunities, or somebody just wants to see, why are you sitting in that chair in that particular office? Here you go. Um, but I do think, kind of, you don't always realize what you've learned throughout your career and those experiences that have kind of taught you um, that. So keep a track of it. Um, you know, Again, being a student of whatever profession you're in, knowing what's coming up, understanding how organizations work, um, merging trends, all of that kind of stuff. Read, um, cyber stock in a nice way. Other corporations or organizations or schools or whatever that um, maybe you want your role to be a best practice, or you're looking for best practices and you follow that. I mean, I learned so much in my career by just um, finding new topics and then seeing what other institutions are doing with them. Uh, so yeah, I like to definitely look at websites. And I think when you get that interview, um, they're going to ask definite questions. They're going to ask why you're interested. Be prepared for that. They're going to ask you to talk about yourself. Be prepared for that. Um, they're they're going to ask, what's your leadership style, your supervisory style. You need to know yourself and be able to talk to that. Um, and if you don't quite know, say, I'm still kind of figuring it out, but this is typically how I handle situations. Um, One of the things I learned quickly was I better have um, a kind of leadership theory that I use. That's one question I always would tend to get asked. And I read my leadership theory and everything, but I really didn't have one where I'm like, this is me and this is what I use as I think of myself as a leader. Uh, I had one interview where I wasn't able to answer that real well, and I figured that out, and I found a leadership theory that really exemplifies how I approach things. And so now I go into interviews being able to talk to that. Um, so I think, again, it's being able to present yourself in a way where you're melding, you know, yourself, and you're melding the expertise that you have with the experiences that you've had and being able to showcase all three. But also being a really, really, really good listener, because again, not every culture is the same, and you want to see if you're a good fit. And it is okay to be able to walk out of that interview, and if that your gut's saying, "Mm-mm,
Mm-mm.
this is not the place for me. I know the money's looking good. I'm kind of feeling the need for that job." If your gut's saying no, follow that gut because it doesn't lie. Um, and you don't have to take that. That something good will come your way.
Mhm.
Ooh, that's a high point to end
Yeah,
on right there.
absolutely. Yes. Fantastic. Well,
Something
where can
good will
students
come your
find
way.
you if they want to come talk to you just about Title IX, Title VI, ADA, or just in general?
Sure.
They just want to continue this conversation. Where can they find you on
Absolutely.
campus?
So I'm on third floor of Administration Hall. It's room 305. Yeah, please come visit us. Because it's lonely up here. It's not very many people come up to the third floor of Administration
And
Hall.
it's beautifully
Um,
renovated now too.
but
So
yeah, we have now ADA compatible bathrooms, and we're adding a new testing center because we've just had that kind of response from students. So we're happy to accommodate.
Awesome. Thank you so
excellent.
much for being a guest. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Well, that will do it for another episode of Behind the Bearcat, and we will talk to you next time. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to give us a thumbs up below. That helps out. Also, if you've not done so yet, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Also, we'd love to connect with you on social media. You can find Behind the Bearcat on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Plus, the audio podcast comes out on Fridays on all the major podcast platforms. Thanks again for watching Behind the Bearcat, and as always, we'll talk to you next time.